In one of the world's most isolated deserts, engineers under Taliban command are carving a canal so massive it is visible from space, and they are doing it without a dollar of foreign aid. Their aim is to transform parched earth into farmland and to rewrite Afghanistan's future. But this $600 million gamble could cripple Uzbekistan's lifeblood river and ignite a water war across Central Asia. No one expected the Taliban to build anything like this. How did a sanctioned regime pull off a project the world called impossible? And how close are we to a crisis no one can stop? Rows of earth movers and excavators line the northern Afghan desert, engines rumbling through the night. The Kosh-Tepe Canal is advancing at a pace that few outside observers thought possible, powered by a fleet that numbers in the thousands. These are not newly purchased machines. Many were seized in the chaotic aftermath of the 2021 government collapse, left behind by fleeing officials or repurposed from abandoned mining operations. Since the first dig in early 2022, the Taliban has drawn on every available asset, assembling a mechanical army that works around the clock. The backbone of this effort is a labor force estimated at 6,000 people. Workers are organized into rotating shifts, ensuring that the excavation never stops. Some are seasoned operators, once employed by the former government or private firms. Others are local farmers, now trained to handle heavy machinery or assist with manual tasks. Field camps have sprung up along the canal's path, housing teams for weeks at a time. Meals, rest, and repairs are managed on-site, minimizing downtime and keeping the project's momentum unbroken. Satellite images capture the relentless advance, a fresh gash in the earth stretching further each month, with columns of trucks ferrying soil and rock away from the trench. Bulldozers push aside dunes while graders and compactors follow close behind, shaping the canal's banks out of the very sand and clay they excavate. The machinery is basic by international standards, and much of it shows signs of age and hard use. But the sheer volume, hundreds of excavators, dump trucks, and support vehicles compensates for any lack of sophistication. Behind the scenes, logistics teams coordinate fuel deliveries, spare parts, and rotations of both men and machines. The National Development Company oversees the operation, claiming adherence to engineering standards and promising that every stage is being managed by Afghan specialists. There are no foreign contractors, no international consultants, just a domestic workforce operating under a regime determined to prove its capability through action, not words. The result is a project that moves with an urgency rarely seen in Afghanistan's history. Every bucket of earth hauled from the desert floor is a step closer to transforming barren land into fields. But the speed comes at a cost. The methods are rudimentary, and the risks of collapse and breach are ever present. For now, though, the canal grows longer by the day, powered by a combination of seized machinery and relentless human effort. Coal from Afghanistan's northern mines is the fuel behind the Kosh-Tepe Canal's relentless advance. Every week, convoys of trucks carry black rock from the seams of Samangan and Baghlan to government depots, where it is sold to local industry and exported across the border. The revenue, estimated at over $500 million annually, flows directly into Taliban-controlled accounts, bypassing international banks and sanctions. With foreign aid frozen and the formal economy in crisis, this domestic cash stream has become the lifeblood of the canal project. Taliban finance overseers allocate millions each month to keep the machinery moving. Payrolls for thousands of workers, fuel for engines, and spare parts for battered excavators are all paid from coal income. The National Development Company, acting as both treasurer and project manager, tracks expenditures with a wartime discipline. There are no international contractors, no oversight from donors, just a closed loop of extraction, sale, and reinvestment. This financial engine powers a pace that stuns outside observers. Satellite images from February 2025 show the canal stretching more than 200 kilometers, nearly 3/4 of its planned length. At peak, the project has advanced as fast as 15 kilometers per month, a tempo unheard of for a project of this scale in Afghanistan. Official figures put total spending near $700 million, with an extra $100 million injected to cover unexpected breaches and repairs. The Taliban's strategy is clear. They prioritize speed over perfection. Earth is moved by the ton, day and night, with little pause for technical refinement. Unlined banks and rough-cut spillways are the trade-off for momentum. The goal is to deliver water to the fields as soon as possible, to prove that the regime can deliver what decades of foreign-backed governments could not. But this rapid progress comes with consequences that are only now becoming apparent. The canal's walls, built from loose desert soil, have already shown signs of weakness. December 2023 saw a breach that flooded 30 square kilometers of land, forcing emergency repairs and a brief halt in digging. Even so, the pace resumed almost immediately, as coal trucks kept the money flowing and the machines on the move. By early 2025, with 70% of the canal complete, Afghanistan stands on the verge of transforming its agricultural future. The question is whether this approach that puts speed first will hold up once the water begins to flow. At the heart of the Qosh-Tepe controversy lies a number, 650 cubic meters per second. That is the design intake capacity of the canal at its headworks on the Amu Darya. Hydrologists have run the math, and the numbers are stark. Over a year, if the canal operates at full capacity, it could divert up to 20 billion cubic meters of water. Most independent models, though, project a more likely annual diversion of 10 to 15 billion cubic meters, depending on the season and actual operational efficiency. Even at the lower end, this represents nearly 20% of the Amu Darya's average flow at the Kaldar intake, where the canal branches off. The Amu Darya's baseline flow, measured at the Kirki gauge downstream, averages between 52 and 67 billion cubic meters per year, but that number is not stable. In dry years, the river can drop to 40 billion cubic meters or less, while wet years might push it above 70 billion. The river's pulse is dictated by snowmelt and glacial runoff from the Pamirs and Hindu Kush, peaking in spring and early summer, then tapering off sharply by autumn. It is during these late months, when the river shrinks and the fields downstream are at their thirstiest, that the canal's impact will be felt most acutely. Hydrologists tracking satellite data and gauging stations warn that a steady 10 to 15 billion cubic meters diverted upstream could push downstream flows below critical thresholds, especially in dry years. For Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, whose economies depend on predictable irrigation cycles, even a 15% reduction can mean the difference between a viable cotton harvest and fields left fallow. In some scenarios, a 20% cut at the wrong moment could trigger cascading shortages all the way to the Aral Sea. The scale of the Qosh-Tepe intake is not just a technical marvel, it is a statement of intent. Afghanistan is asserting its right to water on a scale never attempted before, with a single canal poised to claim a fifth of the region's most vital river. For neighboring countries, the numbers are more than statistics. They spell out a looming crisis, measured not in headlines, but in cubic meters per second. Water begins its journey at the canal's intake, but much of it never reaches the fields. The Qosh-Tepe Canal, carved through raw desert, runs unlined for nearly its entire length. Soil scientists tracking the project warn that these porous banks are more sieve than barrier. In the peak of summer, when temperatures soar above 45 degrees Celsius, evaporation and seepage combine to drain away between 30 and 60% of the canal's flow before it can be used for irrigation. In practical terms, that means if 10 billion cubic meters are diverted from the Amu Darya, only about 4 to 7 billion will actually arrive at Afghan farmland. The losses are not just water. The Amu Darya carries a heavy load of silt, up to 2 million tons each year, swept down from the mountains. Without concrete lining or proper sediment traps, much of this material settles inside the canal. Over time, the bed rises, reducing capacity and forcing more frequent breaches and overflows. Maintenance teams face an endless battle, dredging out tons of mud with the same basic machinery used for digging, often falling behind as sediment piles up faster than it can be removed. Downstream, the effects ripple outwards. Every cubic meter lost to seepage or trapped as mud is a cubic meter that never makes it to Uzbek or Turkmen fields. As the canal stretches further, the efficiency gap widens, and the shortfall grows. Farmers in Uzbekistan's Khwarezm region and Turkmenistan's Dashaguz province, already struggling with erratic flows, face the prospect of sudden shortages when they need water most. The canal's rough construction means that even in wet years, the system will underperform, compounding the risk in times of drought. Then comes the clock that soil scientists fear most: salinization. As water seeps through the sandy banks and pools in low fields, it dissolves salts buried deep in the desert floor. Within 3 to 5 years, these salts can rise to the surface, turning once promising farmland into crusted wasteland. Soviet-era canals across Central Asia followed the same pattern. First a flush of green, then a creeping white blight that choked crops and forced entire communities to move. Without advanced drainage and careful water management, the Kosh-Tepe Canal risks repeating this cycle, trading short-term gains for a slow, irreversible decline. The engineering shortcuts that made the canal possible at breakneck speed now threaten to undermine its promise. Every drop lost to the sand, every ton of silt left to settle, and every patch of land turned saline tightens the squeeze on the region's most precious resource. The numbers are stark, and the consequences, both for Afghanistan and its neighbors, are only beginning to surface. Official letters began arriving in Kabul in the spring of 2023, each stamped with the crests of foreign ministries in Tashkent and Ashgabat. The language was formal, but the message was clear: stop the diversion or answer for the consequences. Uzbekistan's first protest note, dated March 14, 2023, cited the projected loss of up to 20% of the Amu Darya's flow. Turkmenistan followed with its own letter in April 2023, warning of catastrophic shortages for its cotton fields. By the end of 2024, more than a dozen diplomatic notes had crossed the border, each more urgent than the last. Yet the canal kept growing. In every exchange, Afghan officials pointed to a simple fact: Afghanistan is not a signatory to the 1992 Helsinki Convention on Transboundary Watercourses, nor to any of the Soviet-era basin agreements that govern the Amu Darya's flow downstream. The legal frameworks that bind Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan simply do not apply to Kabul. For decades, Afghanistan's instability and limited infrastructure meant its water use was negligible, an afterthought in regional negotiations. Now, with the Kosh-Tepe Canal nearing completion, that legal vacuum has become the central fault line. International water law offers little recourse. The Helsinki Convention, ratified by most of the basin states in the 1990s, sets out principles for fair and reasonable use, but Afghanistan's absence leaves a gap no court can fill. The Soviet-era protocols, which divided the Amu Darya's flow by percentage among downstream republics, never included Afghanistan as more than a footnote. In practice, this means Tashkent and Ashgabat have no enforceable mechanism to force a halt, nor any right to demand compensation. The canal is being built in a space where rules are missing, and every protest note lands in a diplomatic void. Uzbek and Turkmen officials have pressed for emergency talks, seeking at minimum a technical commission to monitor flows. Afghan representatives, when they reply at all, insist the project is an internal matter. A matter no different than a dam or a well dug within their own borders. Without binding treaties or arbitration mechanisms, every new kilometer of canal becomes a test of will, not law. The absence of enforceable rules leaves the region in a precarious standoff, where diplomacy struggles to find traction and every side is left calculating its next move. Uzbekistan's cabinet gathers behind closed doors, studying charts that predict a 20% drop in Amu Darya flows. Every scenario comes with a cost. If the canal is allowed to operate at full capacity, Uzbek cotton fields could dry up by midsummer, threatening the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands. Yet the alternative, direct confrontation, carries dangers of its own. Military intervention risks igniting a regional war, drawing in Russia through its base in Tajikistan, or even prompting a broader conflict that could destabilize Central Asia for years. Diplomatic envoys shuttle between Tashkent, Kabul, and Moscow, searching for a way out. Some propose a technical commission to monitor water flows, hoping that data sharing and transparency might buy time. Others urge mediation by China or Russia, both of whom have economic stakes in regional stability and the flow of goods along the new trade corridors. Beijing, reliant on Uzbek cotton and Afghan minerals, signals willingness to broker talks, but stops short of public guarantees. Moscow, wary of unrest on its southern flank, quietly increases patrols along the Tajik border. Sanctions are floated as a pressure tactic. Uzbek officials draft proposals for regional embargoes on Afghan coal or transit, but these measures risk pushing Afghanistan further into isolation and deepening the humanitarian crisis. Each option is fraught with uncertainty. The canal's rapid completion has outpaced the slow machinery of international law, leaving few levers to pull. Behind the scenes, security agencies model worst-case scenarios. Sabotage, whether by local actors, foreign proxies, or desperate farmers, remains a low probability but high-impact risk. A single breach could flood Afghan villages or disrupt the canal long enough to spark panic. Yet every covert action carries the danger of escalation, retaliation, and civilian suffering on both sides of the border. Regional leaders weigh their choices under immense pressure. The stakes are existential: food security for Afghanistan, economic survival for Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, and the specter of conflict that could redraw alliances across the heart of Asia. With each passing month, the window for a peaceful resolution narrows, and the canal inches closer to completion. The world watches as the region stands on the knife's edge, caught between the promise of new farmland and the threat of a water war. Right now, water from the Amu Darya cuts new lines across Afghanistan's desert and redraws Central Asia's balance of power. As climate stress intensifies and treaties remain unsigned, every drop diverted risks, triggering consequences beyond irrigation. In a region where rivers know no borders, the canal's true impact is only beginning. The world is watching. Because this story is far from over, share your thoughts below.